Welcome to this week's episode of Sojourner.
Welcome back to the ongoing series, How Spaces Define Masculinity, a Black and Black-Biracial Men's Initiative. My name is Carol Jean Matthews-Shifflett, and I am the CEO of the Sojourner Group. I'd like to start by thanking my sponsors, the Utah Jazz, Planned Parenthood Association of Utah, Pacific Island Knowledge to Action Resource, PCAR, the Utah Coalition Against Sexual Assault, UCASA, and Inlighten Productions. Let me introduce Charles Odoms of Hartford, Connecticut. Charles has a master's in social work, is a counselor of men. He is also the founder of Black Heritage Film and Discussion. And next we have Al Davis from Washington, D.C. Al is a pianist, composer, and an IT business owner. And lastly, we have Jack Haslip. Jack is from Salt Lake City, Utah. Jack is a retired director of career and student employment services from Salt Lake Community College. Gentlemen, welcome. So, Jack, it was my understanding that Utah had a large Black community, and that they were very, very close-knit community. That they were thriving in the community. Can you speak to that?
Yes, a large Black community. Salt Lake City has never had a large Black community, but we had a concentrated Black community, meaning that we lived within a certain area. You could find Black people on 4th South, 4th East. There were areas, and there was a community center, and you would see Black people come from the greater Salt Lake area to be with Black people and so forth from all the different high schools and such. But, and violence perpetrated, what they call Black on Black violence. You did not see a lot of that here in Salt Lake City, Utah, because you knew the families, all of the different families. And when families came in, they joined with the church or whatever organization, the Elks or whatever else, and you began to know the family. So that was a great thing, but you have to realize that there was still that violence that had to happen when there was a problem with the greater community. And it got out of hand because the Black people here in Salt Lake City, Utah, were not going to have it. There are a lot of people that work behind the scenes for employment, all those kinds of things. But then again, there were the biggest fights that happened in Utah when I was growing up was people would ask, are you Catholic or are you Mormon? Okay, it was along religious line. And if you said, because most people said, well, I'm Baptist or I'm Methodist or I'm AME or whatever they said, then you were looked at very strangely. But then you were going to still be called out when they decided that you were not acceptable or your skin was the wrong color, and they began to call you nigger, they call you this, they call you that. That's when you would see violence happen, or when, well, you've always got a certain part of the community where young men or young ladies or older men or older ladies are going to run afoul of the law. But that's just the way that is. But no violence like what you're talking about in the larger cities. And I would play football with individuals from the larger cities. And the stories that I heard about a young man who was from Compton talking about, you got to be careful where you walk, who you talk to, what colors you wear, and all of those kinds of things. That was foreign to me here in Utah until later in your 60s and 70s, you began to see that filter in an area like this.
Hey, Jack, are your I want to say ancestors, but you say you're a native of Salt Lake City, but did your folks come from the West, or did they come from the South or the Southwest when they came to Salt Lake City?
My parents came from Texas.
Texas,
both are from
okay.
Texas.
Okay.
We were back and forth to Texas with our cousins and all those kinds of things.
Okay.
They say we talk strange, but that was just coming from a different community. But we had those values, those Southern values.
Yeah, I find that people in a certain generation from Texas, African Americans are tend to be less tolerant of being dealt with, handled. I don't know. I mean, that's anecdotal, but the folks in Texas, the brothers and black folks in Texas, didn't stand for a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Al, they said that about the guys from Washington, D.C. too.
Yes, they did.
Man. There's those other guys with me.
One of the other things I heard about Salt Lake was they had thriving businesses, but once again, and I'm sure this was across the country, once there were too many African Americans gathered in one place, they started shutting those businesses down. And policemen were there policing the places to make sure it didn't get out of hand, because too many Black people, and I'm sure Black men, were gathering in those spaces. So what can you speak to that? Any of you? Al, I'm sure in DC, or Charles in Connecticut.
What
And
do you
I know
mean they began to shut them down? I don't understand that part.
These were stories that I've heard about Salt Lake City, with stores being shut down, businesses being,
the reason,
too much gathering, too much partying.
what do you mean hanging around on the street?
Too much of that, because people will come to Salt Lake, and I remember you saying this once, Charles. Where's the Black community? Where do the brothers go? And I said, you church. But maybe Jack can answer to that better than me, because I'm not from here. But I remember saying church is where the Black brothers go to hang out. So Jack, do you know anything about that experience and the experiences with police actually during that time?
Well, I do know that the church, the barber shops, the beauty salons, places where Black people could go and meet other Black people and socialize and understand what's going on in the different neighborhoods and all of those kinds of things. But I don't, in our area or with my family, we never had a lot of interactions with the police and so forth. And so the Black community thrived, I thought, here in Salt Lake City, Utah. But there was always that overhanging kind of a cloud that had to do with, well, you're only going to have so many opportunities here, because if you understand anything about the Mormon religion, you understand that it's like a club. I don't use the word club.
Yeah.
And it's they wear garments, they do those types of things to identify each other, and they do business accordingly. And so even, when the church that I belong to, when they moved to the present place and had to buy land for that, they had to deal with the Mormon church. And so there's always that overhanging cloud that says, we're watching you. We got an eye on you. And, kind of, you need to stay in your place. Now, it's hard to stay in your place because of whatever reason, but still, never had a lot of problems with the police and so forth, because they knew where the Black folks were, and Black folks congregated there until a little later.
It's a little different in DC when I was growing up, because everything around us was Black.
Yeah.
They did community policing, so the policemen were Black. And they were walking the beat when I was growing up. So they would walk the beat twice a day. And so you'd see these guys, you speak to them, and some of them even lived in the neighborhood. Our dentist was in the neighborhood. Some of our teachers lived in the neighborhood, the churches. So DC was very, very segregated in the early 60s. There is a literal line of demarcation. And it's called west of Rock Creek Park. In DC, you go up to, before you get to Rock Creek Park, there's Rock Creek Park. And everything on the other side of Rock Creek Park is white. Everything. All the money, all the politicians, and the whole 9 yards. Mm-hmm. And everything east of Rock Creek Park was Black. And literally, if you were to go to the other side of town, you were profiled. Strictly profiled. And so we stuck in our community. We stayed in our community. And so we didn't, so we saw black policemen, we saw black doctors, black dentists, lawyers, a whole 9 yards, and of course, government workers and things of that nature, because we were in our community. The challenge came when the civil rights movement was saying that we could become part of larger society. And so we started going to college. White folks didn't want us there. And we weren't accustomed to that. Not knowing how to handle that, you know. Some of us got angry, some of us got depressed. Some of us went in other directions. It was a real challenge. So, but I do miss community policing with African-American police walking the beat. And everybody knows that made a huge difference growing up. It was just huge.
Yeah.
And
I
I would
agree.
say that affected some of your masculinity, you know, seeing those people as examples in your community, or when they took it away from you, you know, it sounds like it was a bit confusing, or you didn't necessarily know where you were supposed to go or what direction.
That's a good way of putting it, because you can't stay in your community. When you get to a certain age, obviously you will move out into the world, but then you move out to the world and you find out that's not what the rest of the world is like, you know. And so then what do?
Al, would you say that was the downside when you moved out of your black neighborhood into the real world and saw that blacks weren't running everything? Was that a problem for you?
It was a problem, because I found out immediately when I went to GW, just downtown, and we were getting stopped. Me and my best friend, because he lived next door, we both went to GW. We were getting stopped by the campus police 3-4 times a week.
Wow. Yeah.
How did that
Just walking to class.
How did that
that was
affect your idea of masculinity?
well, because that's where the anger came in, and that's where in the church we're told to be angry but sin not.
Mm-hmm.
But now white folks was treating us like trash.
Yeah.
And so we were angry, we were young, and it was pretty hard not to sin. We were ready to knock heads, you know. So it's like, so are you less of a Christian man when you start knocking out white boys? I mean, and you kind of live with this thing because, you know, you still want to follow Jesus, but at the same time, y'all ain't gonna do this to me. No one has ever treated me this way in my entire life. And all of a sudden, you tell me I don't belong, and so you get angry, and you become a lot of things, and you get confused. And the other thing, the worst part about it, especially when it comes to masculinity, and I don't want to hog the conversation, but this is the downside of it, was black women, as far as we could see as black men, were not treated that way.
Yeah.
Mm. You know, if I could add to what you were talking about, when you left home, when you left the environment where you were taught how to act and how to treat people, how to treat young ladies and so forth. And then you went, like I went away to college. And when I went away to college, when I was on the track team, we went through Butte, Montana, and we went into a cafe because we were going to a regional conference meet, and they would not serve us. Okay. But on college campus, things were segregated. Meaning that, you know, you had the black athletes, you had the black scholars, you had all of those individuals that from time to time had to defend themselves against whatever the pressure was, whether it was an academic pressure, whether or not it was like just a physical pressure, because we had individuals coming from the farm that were not black, coming from the farm, and they had an image of what black individuals were. So you needed to be able to defend as part of your masculinity. As a male, you needed to be able to defend, because not only were you being watched by them or potentially dominated by them if you did not defend, but then you had to watch out because the black women were watching too.
Exactly.
So, you know, you need
I know you were winning a lot of
and that
fights.
becomes part of the thing about male masculinity. Is that there are pressures coming from a lot of different sides.
Yes.
And so you're not going to let somebody. So
no,
you're not going to let somebody.
Interesting. Like,
So you were being watched by
like,
everybody. Go ahead, Charles.
my thing is like, I can identify with Jack and Al, but my thing is, like I said, I always knew for some reason, because of the way the men talk, that there was an element out there that you would have to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
So, but growing up in Hartford, like I said, it was like there were no white teachers. I mean, there were no black teachers, no black schools named after black icons, nothing. And if it was like that. So I didn't have this, like Al, this idea of entitlement. But I wasn't sure. My footing wasn't that sure, but I knew that I was better than those guys. But I just wasn't. My self-worth was not in a good place because I didn't have those black images like you had, Al, or even Jack, and Hartford, But the thing that we had though was we had that community, North Hartford they called it, and all the blacks. And Hartford was such a small city and I got around pretty good. I worked in a restaurant with a guy for years and years, so I knew most blacks. I knew if I didn't know them by name, I knew them by sight. Most blacks in Hartford, no kidding. That's no kidding. So, but yeah, my masculinity, like I said, I knew that I was a man, and I knew that I could deal with whatever I had to deal with, but I just didn't have an idea of a good sense of self. I didn't have a strong sense of self, but I would fight if I had to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a question from someone who is online, and they told me to ask, can you put in perspective or explain how young black men gravitate to gangs as part of expressing and defining masculinity?
Wow.
I could easily.
I'd like to take that question.
I'll start it, and I'll keep it real short. We have to be really conscious and careful. And Jack said this earlier, and I'm going to put it in the same perspective. We have to be really conscious and careful of letting the majority of society say what and who we are. You would think, according to the media, that every black young man is facing a gang, that there are gangs in every black community. And it's just not true. It's yes, it happens, but if you think about it, it happens in the ghettos of Ireland, and they're white there, and it happens in the ghettos of Israel. Gangs are their families, their affiliations, but it is not something that many or most black boys gravitate toward. We know that there are gangs, but this whole idea that there are a bunch of gangs and running around in every black community, I don't buy it. And maybe somebody can tell me better.
Well, before you go on, but can you speak to those that do and why you think they gravitate?
No, I can't, because I've heard them talk about it, and it's an experience that I can't identify with. I'm not judging them. I just can't identify with the experience.
If I could weigh in on that from the perspective of this whole thing about having someone to care for you and being able to defend yourself. This whole idea of having a family or having someone that you can depend upon, becomes an issue. And I do have interaction with individuals who decided that a gang was it, and it's just like a family. It's like saying, okay, I need this, I need a support, I need this, I need that, and I'm not getting it from wherever other individuals are getting it from, but I'm getting it from people who are willing to stroke my ego, who are willing to make me feel accepted. And this whole thing about masculinity it's a physical thing, that physical manifestation of masculinity is a physical thing. I'm going to take what's mine, or I'm going to be the alpha in this situation. I'm not going to be run over. So I can see it from that perspective, and I've known young men that have told me, nobody out there cared for me. No, but my gang members here, my homies, or whatever else, they'll die for me. They'll do this for me, and they'll make sure that I have this, that, and the other.
Jack, do you think that them being oppressed in an oppressive society influences that?
Do I believe that what?
Them being oppressed, the young men being oppressed, Black men, and being in an oppressive society influences that decision?
Oh yeah, it does. It has to, because you look over here and things are going well for this person, that person, and the other person. And you're in a single parent family and you can't get the shoes. You can't get the gratifications that this society says that everybody else is getting. So that oppression, where's the way out? And gangs seem to give individuals that way out with like I said, stroking the ego, making them feel good about themselves within that particular parameter.
Stay tuned for the next episode on How Spaces Define Masculinity, a Black and Black-Biracial Men's Initiative.